The windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the Montana snow. David Brennan gripped the steering wheel of his 15-year-old pickup truck, knuckles white against the cracked leather, watching the narrow mountain road disappear into white nothing ahead of him. 57 years old, and he was driving into the middle of nowhere to claim an inheritance from a man he had spent 45 years hating. The radio had given up 2 hours ago, lost to static somewhere past the last gas station. Now there was only the hypnotic rhythm of wipers and the grinding protest of an engine that had seen better decades. David's phone sat dark and useless in the cup holder. No signal, no connection to the world he had left behind in Seattle, where his apartment waited above the plumbing supply store where he worked, where his AA sponsor probably wondered why he had missed their Tuesday meeting, where nobody really needed him anyway. The lawyer's voice still echoed in his head from 3 days ago. Your father has left you his entire estate in Montana, 2,400 acres, the cabin, everything. David had almost laughed. Father, as if General William Brennan had earned that title by anything other than biology. The memory came unbidden, sharp as always. David at 12 years old, standing in the driveway of their house in Virginia, his mother crying on the porch, William Brennan in his dress uniform, loading a duffel bag into a dark green Jeep, the morning sun making his metals shine. David had asked where he was going. How long this time? His father had looked at him with those ice blue eyes and said something about duty, about serving something greater than oneself, about how David would understand when he was older. He never came back. Oh, there had been letters for a while, birthday cards with money inside but no personal message, official-looking envelopes with no return address. Then nothing. His mother had remarried when David was 16. A good man, a postal worker named Frank who taught David how to fix leaking faucets and told him it was okay to cry. Frank had been at David's wedding. Frank had held David's son Ethan when he was born. Frank had been the one they called Dad. William Brennan had been a ghost, a name on old photographs his mother kept in a shoebox, a question mark, a wound that never quite healed. And now the son of a bitch was dead and had left David his mountain. The GPS on his phone had worked long enough to show him the basic route before the signal died. The lawyer had provided a hand-drawn map as backup, roads marked with careful notations about landmarks since there were no street signs this far into the wilderness. Turn left at the lightning-struck pine, right at the boulder shaped like a bear, follow the creek bed north. David had thought the man was joking, but here he was, actually looking for a lightning-struck pine in the middle of a snowstorm. He almost missed it. The tree loomed out of the white curtain, massive and dead, split down the middle by some ancient strike, its blackened halves reaching toward the sky like pleading arms. David turned left onto what was barely a road, more of a suggestion of cleared ground between the pines. The truck bucked and complained over frozen ruts. Branches scraped the sides with sounds like fingernails on metal. How far had the lawyer said? Another 3 miles after the tree. 3 miles that would take half an hour at this crawl. David checked the gas gauge. Quarter tank. Enough. Probably. He had a sleeping bag in the back. Worst case scenario, he would survive a night in the truck. He had survived worse in Iraq, back when he was young and stupid enough to think that serving in the Army Rangers made him like his father. It had taken him 20 years to understand that he had joined up because he was still that 12-year-old boy trying to earn approval from a man who was never coming back. Another 10 years to stop drinking about it. The scars were still there, on his body and in his head, but the drinking had stopped. 3 years sober last month, his sponsor had given him a chip. David had it in his pocket now, smooth and worn from nervous touching. The cabin appeared without warning. One moment there was only white and trees. The next there was a structure, substantial and dark against the snow. David stopped the truck and killed the engine. The sudden silence felt wrong. No wind sound, no bird calls, just muffled nothing, the way snow swallows sound and gives nothing back. He sat there for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled, looking at the place his father had chosen over his family. It was bigger than he had expected. Not some rustic shack, but a real building. 2 stories of weathered timber with a stone chimney and a wide porch that wrapped around at least 2 sides. Solar panels on the roof, incongruous and modern. A satellite dish. A generator shed off to one side. This was not a hermit's retreat. This was a base of operations. David grabbed his duffel bag from the passenger seat and stepped out into the cold. The snow came up past his boots. His knees protested, arthritis he pretended he did not have making itself known. The air smelled like pine and ice, and something else, something wild and musky that made the hair on his neck prickle. The porch steps were solid under his weight. Someone had maintained this place, swept it clear of leaves and debris. The front door was heavy wood reinforced with iron straps, the kind of door that was meant to keep things out. Or in. The key the lawyer had given him turned smoothly in the lock. The door swung open on silent hinges. The interior was dark. David fumbled along the wall until he found a switch. Lights flickered on, LED bulbs running off the solar battery system. The room that revealed itself was not what he expected. Clean, organized, almost military in its precision. A large space that served as living room and kitchen combined. Furniture that was functional rather than comfortable. Bookshelves lining one wall, filled with volumes on wildlife biology, genetics, veterinary medicine. A desk in the corner with a computer that looked expensive and out of place. The stone fireplace dominated one wall, wood already laid and ready to light. But it was the walls themselves that made David stop and stare. Photographs, dozens of them, hundreds maybe, covering nearly every available surface. Not pictures of people, pictures of wolves. Wolves in the forest, wolves in the snow, close-ups of wolf faces with eyes that seemed almost human in their intensity, and not normal wolves either. These were massive, the size of Great Danes, with unusual coloring in proportions that seemed subtly wrong. David moved closer to one wall. The photographs were labeled with dates and names: Ghost, Alpha Male; Luna, Alpha Female; Shadow, Beta Scout; River, Ember, Ash, Storm. 25 names total, carefully cataloged like a military unit roster. In the corner of the room, something gleamed. David walked over and found a gun cabinet, locked but with a glass front. Inside were rifles, not hunting rifles but military-grade weapons. An AR-15, a Remington 700 with the scope, a shotgun, boxes of ammunition stacked neatly below. This was not the gun collection of a mountain recluse. This was an armory. What the hell had his father been doing up here? David found the bedroom on the second floor. A single bed, neatly made. A dresser with folded clothes that would probably fit him. The Brennan men all built the same. A closet with winter gear, boots, a heavy parka. But it was the nightstand that caught his attention. A journal, leather-bound and thick, the pages full of his father's cramped handwriting. David picked it up, feeling the weight of it in his hands. He should not read it. Whatever was in here was none of his business. His father had made it clear decades ago that David was not part of his life. He opened it anyway. The first entry was dated 5 years ago. Day 1 of observation. 25 subjects relocated to the Blackwood property. Project Fenrir is now fully my responsibility. Initial behavioral assessments show higher than expected cognitive function. Subject Ghost approached the fence line and maintained eye contact for 47 seconds. This is not normal wolf behavior. David flipped through pages, scanning entries. The handwriting became more agitated as the dates progressed. References to someone named Dr. Cross. Mentions of Blackwood Corporation. Phrases that made no sense. Neural implant success rate 72%. Subjects demonstrating tool use. Pack coordination beyond standard parameters. Ethical concerns mounting. He found a page that had been written over repeatedly. The pen strokes so hard they had nearly torn through. They are not animals anymore. They are people trapped in wolf bodies, and I helped do this to them. God forgive me. God forgive what we have done. Further in, near the end of the journal, the entries became shorter, more desperate. Day 1847. Cross knows I have been sabotaging the equipment. Shaw suspects. I need to finish this before they stop me. I have changed the will. David must be the one. He is strong enough. I failed him as a father, but maybe I can give him a chance to be the man I never was. The final entry was dated 6 months ago, 2 weeks before William Brennan had died of an apparent heart attack. They are coming. I can hear the vehicles. Shaw has made his choice. I hope David understands why I did what I did. I hope he can finish what I could not. I hope he can forgive me. The page ended there, mid-sentence, as if his father had been interrupted. David sat on the edge of the bed, the journal heavy in his hands, trying to process what he was reading. His father had been involved in some kind of experiment, something with wolves, something that had gone wrong, something that had gotten him killed. He should leave, pack up, drive back down the mountain, let the lawyers sort this out. This was not his problem. His father had made sure David was not part of his life. Why should David clean up his mess? His phone buzzed in his pocket. David pulled it out, surprised. No signal bars, but there was a message delivered through some local Wi-Fi network he could see the satellite dish must provide. The message was from a number he knew, a number he had not seen on his screen in over 3 years. Ethan, his son, his boy, 28 years old now, grown and living his own life after telling David he did not want a drunk for a father anymore. David had been sober for 6 months when Ethan cut contact. Not long enough, not enough to undo the years of disappointment and broken promises. David had tried reaching out twice since then, both messages ignored. Now Ethan was texting him. Dad, I am in Montana doing a wildlife story. I know you are up at Grandpa's place. We need to talk. Something is not right here. Can you call me when you get this, please? David stared at the message, reading it 3 times. Ethan was here, in Montana, and he knew about the cabin. How did he know? Had the lawyers contacted him? And what did he mean something is not right? He tried calling the number. It rang once and went to voicemail. The sound of his son's voice on the recording, still formal and distant. Leave a message. Dad, it is me. I am at the cabin. I got your message. Call me back as soon as you can. He sent a text. Where are you? Are you okay? The message showed delivered, but no response came. David stood and walked to the window. Full dark now, the storm still raging. He could not see more than a few feet beyond the glass. Somewhere out there, his son was in trouble, or thought he was trying to reconnect and using work as an excuse. David did not know which possibility scared him more. He went back downstairs and started going through the desk, files in neat folders, contracts and receipts, a land lease agreement between William Brennan and Blackwood Helix Corporation, dated 5 years ago. $50,000 per month in exchange for use of the eastern 400 acres for research purposes. David did the math. $3 million over 5 years. His father had been paid, handsomely paid. This was not some unwilling victim. William Brennan had rented out his land for whatever these people were doing. But then David found another folder, this one hidden in a locked drawer. The key had been taped under the desk, a spy movie cliche that apparently worked. Inside were photographs that made his stomach turn. Wolves in cages, not of the dignified animals from the wall photos, but gaunt, desperate creatures with wild eyes. Wolves on operating tables, shaved and opened up, hands in surgical gloves doing things to their brains. Wolves with metal devices attached to their skulls. Wolves that were not quite wolves anymore, their proportions wrong, their faces too expressive, their eyes too knowing. One photo showed his father standing with a group of people in lab coats. His father looked years younger, his uniform still crisp, his face hard and proud. Behind them were cages. The photo was stamped in the corner with red letters, Classified Project Fenrir, 1987. 1987, the year his father had left, the year he had told 12-year-old David that he was serving something greater than family. This was what had been more important than his son. David was still staring at the photo when he heard the sound. A howl, low and mournful, rising through the storm, then another answering the first, then more until the night was full of voices, a chorus of something wild and shade and angry all at once. They were close, very close. David moved to the window and peered out into the darkness. For a moment he saw nothing, then eyes. Dozens of pairs of eyes reflecting the light from the cabin, arranged in a semicircle around the porch. Yellow eyes. Too large, too intelligent. They were not running, not attacking, just watching, waiting. David stood frozen, his breath fogging the glass. His combat instincts from Iraq were screaming at him to grab a weapon, to fortify his position, to prepare for assault. But something else, some deeper instinct, told him that was the wrong move. These were not mindless animals. His father's journal had said as much. They are not animals anymore. They are people trapped in wolf bodies. The phone in his pocket buzzed again. David pulled it out, not taking his eyes off the wolves. Another message, not from Ethan, from an unknown number. The text read, Mr. Brennan, you should not have come. Your father made a deal. Silence in exchange for safety. You have 48 hours to sign the property transfer documents and leave Montana. If you do not, your son will suffer the consequences your father avoided. Do not test us. Do not involve authorities. We are watching everything." David's blood went cold. He looked back at the wolves. One of them, larger than the others with silver-gray fur and a notch torn from its left ear, stepped forward. It looked up at the window, directly at David, and held his gaze. In that moment, David saw something that would haunt him: intelligence, recognition, and something that looked like pleading. The large wolf tilted its head, then deliberately looked to its left, toward the eastern part of the property where the Blackwood Corporation had their facilities. Then it looked back at David and repeated the gesture. Left, east, a direction being communicated. David pressed his hand against the glass. The wolf stepped closer to the porch, into the pool of light from the cabin windows. Then it did something that made David's rational mind rebel, even as he witnessed it. The wolf lowered its head and began to move deliberately through the fresh snow that had accumulated on the porch steps. Not random movements, purposeful scraping, using the broad side of its muzzle first, then carefully placing its front paws to create indentations. The movements were awkward, clumsy even, not designed for this purpose, but the intent was unmistakable. David watched as crude shapes formed in the snow, not perfect letters, not elegant handwriting, but unmistakable symbols that any human could recognize. The wolf worked slowly, checking its work, adjusting, using its nose to push snow aside, using its paw to press deeper marks, creating contrast between disturbed and undisturbed snow. H, then E, then L, then P. The letters were rough, barely legible, the kind of writing a child might make with a stack in dirt. But they were there, deliberate, intentional, impossible to dismiss as coincidence or pattern-seeking. The wolf looked up at him again, its amber eyes boring into his. Then it turned and melted back into the storm. The other wolves followed, vanishing as quickly as they had appeared. The howling stopped. The night became silent again, except for the wind. David stood at the window for a long time, his mind trying to process what he had just seen. A wolf creating symbols in snow. Not language, not really, but communication sophisticated enough to transcend species barriers. His father had written that they were people trapped in wolf bodies. David had thought it was metaphor, hyperbole born of guilt. It was not metaphor, it was observation. But the message on his phone was real. The threat against Nathan was real. His father's journal was real. The photographs of wolves with metal implants in their skulls were real. He walked back to the desk and picked up the satellite phone he had seen there earlier. His father had kept it connected, probably for emergencies. David dialed Ethan's number again. Still voicemail. He left another message, trying to keep his voice calm. "Ethan, it is Dad. I do not know what you have gotten into, but I got a threatening message about you. Call me back immediately. If you are in trouble, if you need help, I am here. I know I have not been the father you deserved, but I am here now. Please call me." He hung up and stood in the quiet cabin, surrounded by his father's secrets, thinking about a 12-year-old boy watching his father drive away, thinking about his own son cutting contact 3 years ago, thinking about the wolves outside with their too intelligent eyes and their impossible ability to communicate through crude symbols in snow. David Brennan had come to Montana expecting to sign some papers and sell some land. Instead, he had inherited a war he did not understand, a son in danger, and a debt to a father he had never forgiven. He walked to the gun cabinet and used the key that was hanging on a hook beside it. The lock opened. David lifted out the AR-15, checked the chamber, loaded a magazine. The muscle memory from his Ranger days came back easily. His hands knew these movements even if his back protested and his knees ached. Then he pulled on his father's heavy parka, laced up the cold weather boots, and stepped out into the storm. If they were watching, let them watch. If they wanted him gone, they would have to make him leave. And if they had his son, they were about to learn that some things ran in the Brennan blood deeper than abandonment and regret. The capacity for violence when the people you loved were threatened. David walked off the porch and into the snow, following the direction the silver wolf had indicated. East, toward whatever facility was out there. Toward the truth about what his father had done. Toward Ethan. The wind howled around him and he thought he heard an answering howl in the distance. Not threatening, almost like encouragement. He was not alone in this, he realized. The wolves were not his enemy. They were victims just like Ethan, just like his father had been in the end, trying to make right what he had made wrong. The cabin disappeared behind him into the white darkness. David checked his weapon one more time and kept walking. Somewhere ahead was a facility. Somewhere ahead was his son. Somewhere ahead was the reason his father had chosen duty over family all those years ago. And somewhere in these mountains, 25 genetically modified wolves with human-level intelligence were watching him, waiting to see what choice he would make. The son of General William Brennan, the man who had created them. The father of Ethan Brennan, the hostage they were using for leverage. The question was no longer whether David could finish what his father started. The question was whether he was willing to become the kind of man his father had been, willing to sacrifice everything for what was right, even if it meant losing everything in the process. The snow crunched under his boots. The rifle was cold in his hands. His breath came in white clouds that the wind tore away. And behind him in the darkness, yellow eyes watched, waiting, judging, hoping. Day one of David Brennan's inheritance had begun. The snow had stopped by the time David found the entrance. Not the main facility he had been searching for, but something else. A steel door set into the hillside, camouflaged with rock facing and nearly invisible under a coating of ice. He would have walked right past it if not for the wolf. Ghost, that was the name his father had given the alpha male in the journal. The massive silver-gray animal had appeared out of the trees an hour into David's trek east, materializing from the darkness like a phantom. No aggression, no threat, just steady presence, padding along 20 feet to David's left, occasionally stopping to look back and make sure the human was following. Now Ghost sat in front of the hidden door, one paw raised, touching the steel surface. When David approached, the wolf backed away, but did not leave. Those amber eyes watched David with an intensity that made his skin prickle. Waiting, expecting. David examined the door, no handle on the outside, no keypad, but there was a scanner, subtle and nearly hidden in the rock facing. Biometric. His father had been military, had probably been authorized for entry. David pulled off his glove and pressed his hand against the scanner, not expecting anything to happen. The scanner lit up, processing. For 3 seconds, David was certain it would reject him, would sound an alarm, would alert whoever was monitoring this place. Then the door clicked. A motor whirred. The steel panel slid open with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a concrete stairwell descending into darkness below the mountain. David stood there for a moment, stunned. His father must have registered him in the system. Years ago, probably, when David was still in his 20s, before the drinking, before Ethan, before everything fell apart. A precaution the old man had taken without ever mentioning it. Insurance that if something happened, if William could not finish what he started, his son would have access to the truth. It was the first gift his father had given him in 45 years, the key to a nightmare. Emergency lighting activated automatically as David stepped inside, pale LED strips along the walls casting everything in cold blue white. The air that rose from below was warm and stale, carrying scents of disinfectant and something organic he could not identify. Behind him, Ghost made a sound that was not quite a growl, not quite a whine, a sound of distress. David turned. The wolf stood at the threshold, every muscle tense, ears flat against his skull. He would not enter. Could not, perhaps. Too many bad memories in this place. Go, David said quietly, surprising himself by speaking to the animal. I will find him. I will find what happened here. Ghost held his gaze for a long moment. Then the wolf did something that made David's breath catch. He bowed his head, a gesture of acknowledgement, almost of respect, and backed away into the forest. The door began to slide closed. David caught one last glimpse of yellow eyes in the darkness before the steel sealed shut with a final hiss. He was alone now, alone in whatever his father had helped create beneath this mountain. The stairwell descended for what felt like 3 stories. David moved slowly, rifle up, checking corners, his old training taking over. The walls were reinforced concrete, military-grade construction. This was not some temporary research station. This was permanent infrastructure, meant to last decades and withstand scrutiny. The stairs ended in a corridor that stretched in both directions. More emergency lighting. Doors with small windows set at eye level. Signs on the walls with designations that meant nothing to David. Lab 3, Observation Suite, Medical Station, Kennel Access. He tried the first door, locked. The second, also locked. But the third door opened when he turned the handle, swinging inward on silent hinges. The smell hit him first, antiseptic trying to cover something worse. Old blood, fear, suffering. David stepped inside and found himself in what had clearly been a surgical theater. Stainless steel tables, overhead lights, cabinets full of instruments, and walls covered in photographs and charts. The photographs showed the progression of the experiments. Normal wolves in the early images, wild and beautiful. Then wolves with shaved patches on their heads, surgical scars visible. Then wolves with metal implants, small devices embedded behind their ears. The progression continued. Wolves with enlarged craniums. Wolves whose eyes had changed, becoming more forward-facing, more expressive. Wolves that looked at the camera with something that was no longer animal. The charts were worse. Genetic sequences with handwritten notations. Success rates. Survival rates that made David's stomach turn. 62% mortality in phase 1. 41% in phase 2. By phase 3, the survival rate had climbed to 78%, but the notes described side effects. Aggression, depression, self-harm. 3 subjects destroyed themselves by repeated impact against cage walls. David moved to a desk in the corner. A computer sat there, monitor dark, but the tower still humming with power. He touched the keyboard and the screen came to life, no password required. Someone had left in a hurry. Files and folders covered the desktop. Project Fenrir, subject profiles, genetic modifications, behavioral studies. David clicked on subject profiles and found detailed dossiers on each of the 25 wolves. Ghost, captured in Alaska 2019, male, approximately 4 years old at time of acquisition. Initial aggression high. Responded well to conditioning. By year 3, subject demonstrated problem-solving ability, equivalent to 8-year-old human child. Can understand approximately 150 words of English. Recognizes individual humans by face and voice. Shows capacity for long-term memory and grudge holding. Note: subject became extremely agitated when Dr. Reeves entered observation area. Remembered her from surgical procedure 6 months prior. David clicked through more profiles. Luna, the alpha female. Shadow, described as the beta and scout. River, Ember, Ash. Each one cataloged like military assets. Each one a victim of what his father had helped create. He found video files. Clicked on one dated 3 years ago. The footage showed a large enclosure, more spacious than a cage but still confined. Ghost paced the perimeter. A speaker crackled and a woman's voice spoke. Ghost, sit. The wolf stopped pacing, looked directly at the camera, and sat. Good. Ghost, come. The wolf walked toward the camera until his face filled the frame. Those intelligent eyes staring into the lens. Ghost, shake. The wolf lifted his right paw and held it out. A hand reached into frame and grasped the paw, shaking it like one would shake hands with another person. The video ended. David sat back, his mind trying to process what he was seeing. This was not animal training. This was communication. These wolves understood language, understood commands, understood that they were being tested and evaluated. He opened another video file, this one dated 6 months ago. The footage was grainy, handheld, clearly recorded in secret. His father's voice whispering, Day 1213. I cannot do this anymore. Look at them. Just look. The camera panned across an enclosure where several wolves lay sleeping in a pile, their bodies intertwined for warmth and comfort. But it was not the sleeping wolves that his father was focused on. It was the 2 wolves sitting apart near the fence. Ghost and another wolf, a smaller female David recognized from the profiles as Ember. They were not just sitting, they were arranging objects. Sticks and stones laid out in patterns on the ground. As David watched, Ghost picked up a stick in his mouth and placed it carefully, then stepped back as if examining his work. Ember added a stone. Then Ghost made an adjustment. They were playing, or creating, or communicating through symbols. Whatever it was not animal behavior. His father's voice continued, thick with emotion. I told myself this was for national security, for military applications, for science, but I was lying. We created slaves, we took wild, free creatures and gave them the curse of consciousness without giving them freedom. We made them smart enough to understand their captivity and powerless to escape it. God forgive me. God forgive what I have done to them. The video ended abruptly. David sat in the cold surgical theater, surrounded by evidence of atrocity, and felt something crack inside him. His father had not been a monster. He had been a man who made a terrible mistake and spent his last years trying to atone for it. A man who had sacrificed his family for duty, realized too late what that duty had cost, and died trying to make it right. A sound from the corridor made David spin, rifle up. Footsteps. Someone else was down here. He moved to the door, peered through the small window. A figure moved past, heading deeper into the complex. A woman, medium height, dark hair pulled back, wearing cargo pants and a heavy jacket. She carried a backpack and moved with purpose. Someone who knew where she was going. David waited until she passed, then slipped out into the corridor and followed. She turned left, then right, navigating the maze of passages without hesitation. David stayed back, using corners for cover, his ranger training making him nearly silent despite the concrete floors. The woman stopped at a door marked Kennel Access and pulled out a keycard. She swiped it and the door clicked open. David rushed forward, catching the door before it closed, his rifle up and ready. The woman spun, her hand going to something on her belt. They stood frozen, eyes locked for a long moment. "Do not," David said quietly. "I do not want to hurt you. I just want answers." The woman's hand slowly moved away from what David could now see was a tranquilizer gun. She looked him up and down, taking in the rifle, the stance, the cold weather gear. "You are William's son," she said. It was not a question. "You have his eyes." "Who are you?" "Dr. Sarah Kovac. I was the supervising veterinarian for Project Fenrir." Past tense. "I quit 6 months ago when they killed your father." David's finger tightened on the trigger. "They killed him?" Sarah held up both hands. "I am not your enemy. I have been living in these tunnels since I refused to continue the experiments. Your father was helping me sabotage the project before they murdered him. Please, lower the weapon. We are on the same side." "Prove it." Sarah slowly reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a photograph. She held it out. David stepped closer, keeping the rifle trained on her with one hand while taking the photo with the other. It showed his father, much older than in the classified photos David had found, standing with this woman beside one of the enclosures. But it was not a formal picture. William Brennan was smiling, actually smiling, with his arm around Ghost's neck. The wolf's tongue lolled out in what looked absurdly like a grin, and in William's other hand, held up to the camera, was a child's drawing, stick figures labeled in crayon. Daddy, Grandpa, Ethan. Ethan had drawn this. His son had been in contact with his grandfather. Sarah saw the recognition in David's face. "William talked about you and Ethan constantly. He said his biggest regret was leaving you when you were 12. He spent every day trying to figure out how to fix what he had broken, both the wolves and his family. When Ethan reached out 5 years ago, William thought he had a chance at redemption." "Ethan knew about this place?" "No. Ethan knew he had a grandfather in Montana. He came to visit 3 times before William got sick. They went fishing, talked. Your father never told him about the project. He wanted to protect Ethan from this." David lowered the rifle slightly. "Where is my son now? I got a message that he is in danger." Sarah's expression darkened. "Ethan came here 2 weeks ago doing a story on wildlife. He did not know his grandfather had died. He did not know about Blackwood Corporation, but he started asking questions in town, taking pictures, and someone recognized him as William Brennan's grandson." David's blood went cold. "Where is he?" "They took him 4 days ago. Colonel Shaw's security team. He is being held at the main facility, about 2 miles northeast of here. Shaw is using him as leverage to force you to sign over the property rights. If Blackwood loses access to this land, they lose everything. $300 million invested, 5 years of research, 25 enhanced wolves they cannot risk moving because any exposure would end the project permanently." "Why not just kill him? Kill me?" Sarah shook her head. "Because Shaw is military old school. He still believes in rules, even twisted ones. He thinks he can control the situation without murder if he can just get you to cooperate. But Dr. Victoria Cross, the head scientist, she has no such limitations. She has been pushing to eliminate you both and make it look like a wilderness accident." "How long do we have?" "According to the timeline I overheard before I went into hiding, 48 hours from when you arrived. That was yesterday. So maybe 36 hours before Cross convinces Shaw that killing you is the only option." David looked at the door Sarah had been entering. What is in there? The kennel, where they kept the wolves before your father helped me move them to the forest enclosures. I have been coming here to gather supplies, to destroy research data, anything to slow down the project. Take me to see Ethan's file, everything Blackwood has on him. Sarah hesitated. There is something you need to understand first about what your son really is. She led him deeper into the complex, through passages that became more cave-like, transitioning from man-made construction to natural limestone formations. They emerged into a large chamber that had been converted into living quarters. Cots, battery-powered lanterns, boxes of supplies. Sarah had been surviving down here for months. She pulled a laptop from a waterproof case and powered it on. While it booted, she pulled out a folder, physical documents that looked official. Your son is not a wildlife journalist, she said quietly. He is a CIA analyst assigned to the Directorate of Science and Technology. He was sent here to investigate Blackwood Corporation because someone in the intelligence community suspected they were developing biological weapons. Ethan had no idea his grandfather was connected. It was pure coincidence that he was assigned this case. David stared at the CIA identification card in the folder. His son's face looked back at him, younger, more serious. Occupation listed as intelligence analyst. Security clearance level listed as top secret SCI. How long have you known? I found his real credentials after they captured him. Shaw has been bragging about it. He thinks having a CIA analyst as a hostage gives him leverage not just over you, but over the whole intelligence community. He is threatening to expose Ethan as a covert operative if the CIA tries to intervene. It would destroy Ethan's career and possibly get him killed by foreign assets. David sat down heavily on one of the cots. His son worked for the CIA, had been trained in intelligence work, had skills David knew nothing about, and was now being held by people who would not hesitate to kill him if they felt threatened enough. Show me everything, David said. Everything you have on the facility layout, security, where they are holding him, everything. Sarah pulled up files on the laptop, blueprints of the main compound, guard rotations, security protocols. She had been gathering intelligence for months, preparing for something, though she had not known what. There are 40 security personnel at the main site, retired military mostly, mercenaries who will follow orders without asking questions. They are armed with lethal and non-lethal weapons. The facility has 3 layers of perimeter security. Your son is being held in the administration building, 2nd floor, in what used to be a conference room. 2 guards outside his door at all times. Can we get him out? Sarah looked at him with something like pity. You are asking if 2 people, one of them a 57-year-old former soldier and the other a veterinarian, can assault a fortified compound defended by 40 trained mercenaries and extract a hostage without getting everyone killed? When you put it that way, it is impossible. Even if we somehow got inside, even if we somehow reached Ethan, we would never make it out. Shaw has helicopter support. Drones, they would hunt us down before we made it a mile. Then what do you suggest? We cannot go in alone. We need help. From who? You said we cannot involve authorities. Sarah smiled, a strange expression given the circumstances. Not human authorities. We need the wolves. David stared at her. You want me to ask the wolves to help us assault a military facility? Not ask. Offer them a deal. Your father spent 3 years teaching them to trust him, teaching them that not all humans are enemies. Ghost and Luna especially. They understand cooperation. They understand that sometimes you have to work together to survive, and they hate the people who tortured them. If we can convince them that helping us means freedom, means revenge, they will fight alongside us. That is insane. Is it? Ghost led you here tonight. He showed you where to find the entrance. He communicated with you. These are not animals anymore, David. They are people trapped in wolf bodies, just like your father wrote in his journal. And right now, they are our only chance. David thought about Ghost creating crude letters in the snow, thought about the wolves arranging stones in patterns, thought about his father's voice saying they understand their captivity. How do I talk to them? How do I convince them? The same way your father did, with honesty, with respect, by treating them like the intelligent beings they are. Ghost especially will understand. He was your father's closest connection. When William died, Ghost howled for 3 straight days. He knows what it means to lose someone you love. David stood and walked to the chamber entrance, looking out into the dark tunnels. Somewhere above, his son was being held prisoner. Somewhere out in the forest, 25 modified wolves were waiting to see what choice he would make. I need to see them. Now, tonight. Sarah checked her watch. It is almost midnight. The wolves will be at the northern enclosure. Your father built it for them, the only place on the property where they can move freely. That is where they gather. That is where Ghost holds what your father called the council meetings. Council meetings? The pack makes decisions collectively. Ghost leads, but he listens to the others, especially Luna and Shadow. They sit in a circle and communicate. Body language mostly, but your father swore they were debating, making plans. He said watching them was like watching a tribal council. They headed back through the tunnels, Sarah leading the way with a flashlight. As they walked, she told him more about the wolves, about Luna, who had protected the younger pack members from the researchers, about Shadow, who could move through the forest like a ghost despite his size, about River and Ember and Ash, the ones who had died during the experiments, who the surviving wolves still mourned, about the intelligence that was both gift and curse. They can never be normal wolves again, Sarah said. Even if we free them, even if we protect them, they will always be caught between two worlds. Too smart to be animals, too different to be human. Your father called them the abandoned children of science. The northern enclosure turned out to be a broad valley, ringed with forest, accessible through a narrow passage that opened onto a natural meadow. The moon had risen, 3/4 full, turning the snow silver. And in the center of the meadow, illuminated by moonlight, sat the wolves. All 25 of them arranged in a loose circle, exactly as Sarah had described. Ghost at the north point, Luna across from him. The others positioned by some hierarchy David did not understand. As he and Sarah approached, every head turned toward them in unison. Yellow eyes reflected the moonlight. Ghost stood slowly. The other wolves remained seated but alert, waiting for their alpha's decision. David walked forward and alone, leaving Sarah at the tree line. He stopped 20 feet from the circle and slowly, deliberately, set his rifle on the ground. Then he walked forward 5 more steps and stopped. Ghost walked toward him, massive and powerful, muscles moving under his thick coat. The wolf stopped just out of reach. David could see the intelligence in those eyes, could see evaluation happening behind them. Friend or enemy, trustworthy or threat, a decision being made. David spoke quietly, not sure if the wolf would understand words or just tone. Your name is Ghost. My name is David. I am William Brennan's son. He was my father. He wanted to free you, but he died before he could. I am here to finish what he started. Ghost tilted his head, a gesture so human it was unsettling. My son is being held prisoner by the same people who hurt you. The people who put metal in your heads, who cut you open, who made you smart enough to hate them. I am going to get my son back, and I am going to destroy everything they built here. But I cannot do it alone. I need help. David knelt in the snow, putting himself lower than the wolf, making himself vulnerable. It was a calculated risk. If Ghost decided he was a threat, decided he was like the scientists who had tortured the pack, David would not be able to reach his rifle in time. I am asking you to trust me the way you trusted my father. I am asking you to fight alongside me. And in return, I promise you freedom. I will give you this land, all of it. No more cages, no more experiments, no more humans hurting you, just forest and sky and the right to live as you choose. Ghost stepped closer. Close enough that David could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell the wild musk of his fur. The wolf's nose was inches from David's face. One wrong move and those jaws could crush his skull. Then Ghost did something that made David's throat tighten. The wolf pressed his forehead against David's forehead, gentle but firm, and closed his eyes, not a gesture of aggression, a gesture of greeting, of acceptance. When Ghost pulled back, he looked directly into David's eyes and made a sound. Not a howl, not a growl, something in between, a complex vocalization that rose and fell in pitch, almost like speech. And the other wolves responded. Luna stood and walked forward, touching her nose to David's hand. Shadow followed. Then the others, one by one, until David was surrounded by wolves, all of them making contact, accepting him into the pack. Sarah's voice came from behind him, thick with emotion. Oh my God, they remember you from the photograph. They know you are William's son. They are accepting you as family. David remained kneeling in the circle of wolves, feeling their warmth, their presence, understanding in that moment what his father must have felt. These were not animals. They were people, Different people with different bodies and different minds, but people nonetheless. And they were offering him something rare and precious: trust. When the wolves stepped back, Ghost remained close. David stood slowly. The wolf watched him, waiting for what came next. We have one day to plan and prepare. Then we attack the facility. We get my son out. We destroy their research. And we end this forever. Ghost tilted his head back and howled. Not a mournful sound this time, but something else. A battle cry. A declaration. The other wolves joined him, their voices rising into the night, echoing off the mountains. And somewhere in the darkness, in the main Blackwood facility 2 miles away, Colonel Marcus Shaw listened to that howling and knew his time was running out. The wolves had chosen a side, and they had chosen war. David Brennan stood in the moonlit meadow, surrounded by genetically modified predators who had decided he was worth following, and felt the weight of what he had inherited settle fully on his shoulders. Not just land, not just his father's guilt, but responsibility for 25 lives that should never have existed, for a son who was paying the price for asking questions, for a choice between walking away and becoming the man his father had needed him to be. He looked at Ghost and saw his answer reflected in those two intelligent eyes. There was no walking away. Not anymore. The time for running had ended the moment he opened his father's journal, the moment he saw crude symbols scraped in the snow, the moment he understood that some debts cannot be inherited, only paid. Tomorrow they would plan, tomorrow they would prepare, tomorrow they would become something new. A pack, human and wolf, fighting together against the people who had hurt them both. But tonight, standing in the circle with moonlight on snow, and the pack accepting him as one of their own, David Brennan finally understood what his father had been trying to tell him in that last journal entry. Some things are worth sacrificing everything for. Some battles have to be fought even when the cost is unbearable. Some legacies are not gifts but responsibilities that follow bloodlines, whether we want them or not. And some promises must be kept even if the person who made them is dead and the world thinks you are crazy for trying. David looked at the wolves, at Sarah watching from the tree line, at the mountains rising around them under the cold stars, and made his choice. Let them come, let Shaw and Cross and all their mercenaries try to stop what was about to happen. They had created these wolves. They had given them intelligence and memory and rage. Now they were about to learn what happened when the weapons you created turned against you. Now they were about to face the consequences of playing God. The wolves fell silent, their howling complete. Ghost sat beside David, and one by one the others settled into resting positions, forming a protective circle around the two humans they had accepted as pack. Tomorrow the war would begin. Tonight they rested together, predator and prey united by a common enemy and a shared hunger for justice. David sat in the snow with his back against Ghost's warm flank and looked up at the stars his father must have looked at during those last months, trying to make right what he had made wrong, trying to find a way to save the creatures he had helped create and the son he had abandoned. I understand now, David whispered to the night. I understand why you did it. I understand what you needed me to be. Ghost's ear twitched, the only sign he had heard, but it was enough. The inheritance was complete. The son had accepted what the father had left behind, and tomorrow, everything would change. Dawn came cold and gray over the Montana mountains. David stood on a ridge overlooking the Blackwood facility, watching smoke rise from the compound's central building. His body ached from a sleepless night spent planning with Sarah and communicating through gestures and drawings with wolves who understood far more than they should. His hands were steady on the binoculars despite the cold, despite the fear, despite knowing that in less than 6 hours he would either have his son back or they would both be dead. The facility sprawled across a cleared valley like a military base. 3 main buildings connected by covered walkways. Chain-link fencing topped with razor wire. Guard towers at each corner. Vehicle depot with 2 helicopters and an armored transport. Motion sensors and cameras covering every approach. 40 armed men inside, according to Sarah's intelligence. Maybe more. Impossible odds for 2 humans. But David was not bringing just 2 humans. Ghost materialized beside him without a sound, the massive wolf moving through the underbrush like smoke despite his size. The alpha sat on his haunches and looked down at the facility, his amber eyes tracking the movement of guards on patrol. Studying, learning, planning. Behind them, hidden in the tree line, the rest of the pack waited. 24 wolves arranged in 3 groups, just as David had drawn in the dirt during the night's planning session. Team Alpha under Ghost's direct command, Team Beta led by Luna, Team Gamma following Shadow. Each team with a specific objective, each wolf understanding, through some combination of David's crude diagrams, Sarah's patient explanations, and their own frightening intelligence, exactly what was expected of them. David checked his watch. 5:43 in the morning. The shift change happened at 6. That was when the security was weakest, when tired guards were thinking about coffee and warm beds instead of threats. That was when they would strike. Sarah emerged from the trees carrying the pack she had assembled during the night. Bolt cutters, wire, smoke grenades she had stolen from the facility's storage months ago. A laptop with hacking software she promised could override the door locks if she could get within range of the facility's Wi-Fi network. And syringes. Dozens of syringes filled with the same tranquilizer the researchers had used on the wolves. Poetic justice, she had said while filling them. Let them feel what it is like to be helpless. David turned to face the pack. 24 pairs of eyes watched him with an intensity that still made his skin prickle. These were not dogs waiting for commands. These were soldiers waiting for orders they would evaluate and choose whether to follow. He had to make them understand not just the plan, but why the plan mattered. He knelt in the snow and began to draw again with a stick. The facility layout, the 3 buildings. He pointed to the eastern building, the administration center, where Ethan was being held according to Sarah's intelligence. He tapped it emphatically, then pointed to his own chest. My son, my blood. Like your pack is your blood. Ghost stood and walked to the drawing. He studied it for a long moment, then deliberately placed his paw on the eastern building. Understanding. Agreement. David drew the western building next, the research laboratory where the genetic data was stored. Sarah would lead Team Gamma there. The objective was to destroy the servers, burn the genetic samples, eliminate every piece of research that could be used to recreate Project Fenrir. He made a striking motion across the drawing. Destroy, end this. Shadow stepped forward and touched his nose to the western building, accepting the mission. The northern building was the barracks where most of the security personnel slept. Team Beta under Luna would create the diversion there. Not to kill unless necessary, but to scatter and confuse. To make the guards think they were under attack by a full wolf pack gone rabid. To draw attention away from the 2 real objectives. Luna approached the drawing and made a sound deep in her chest, not quite a growl, that made the other wolves shift and tense. She understood. She remembered the guards who had hurt them. She would make them run. The plan was simple because complex plans failed. Luna's team would hit the barracks at exactly 6:02, 2 minutes after the shift change. 8 minutes later at 6:10, Shadow's team would breach the western laboratory. Sarah would go with them, using the distraction to reach the servers. At 6:15, David and Ghost's team would enter the eastern building through a service entrance Sarah had mapped. 15 minutes to reach the second floor. Find Ethan. Get out. 30 minutes from first contact to extraction. After that, they would scatter into the forest where the helicopters and vehicles could not easily follow, where the wolves knew every trail and ravine. It was a terrible plan. It relied on too many things going right and assumed nothing would go catastrophically wrong. But it was the only plan they had. David looked at his watch again. 5:51, 9 minutes. He checked his rifle one more time. Loaded and ready. He had 2 extra magazines in his vest and a pistol Sarah had provided as backup. He was wearing dark clothes from his father's closet that smelled like William Brennan, like the man who had walked away when David was 12, who had died trying to make amends. Sarah checked her own equipment. The laptop, the bolt cutters, the syringes and quick access pouches. She looked pale but determined, her hands steady despite the fear in her eyes. You do not have to do this, David said quietly. You have already done more than anyone could ask. Sarah shook her head. I helped create them. I helped run the experiments before I understood what we were really doing. I owe them this. I owe your father this. 5:58. The wolves rose as one, a fluid movement responding to some signal David had not perceived. Ghost took 3 steps forward and turned to face the pack. He made that complex vocalization again, the almost speech sound that rose and fell in pitch. The pack responded, a chorus of similar sounds, low and resonant. A war song, David realized. They were singing themselves into battle. Then silence. Ghost looked at David and dipped his head once. Ready. 6:01. Below in the facility, the guard towers were changing shifts. Tired men climbing down, fresh men climbing up. 40 seconds when both were exposed on the ladders. 6:02. Luna moved. Not a run, but an explosion of motion, her team flowing behind her like a wave of gray and silver death. They hit the northern fence line at full speed, massive bodies and enhanced muscles slamming into chain link. The fence held for 3 seconds. Then Luna hit it again, higher, her jaws closing on the top edge, and her weight tearing a section free from its posts. The wolves poured through. Alarms began to shriek. Spotlights blazed. Guards in the towers were shouting, bringing weapons around, trying to track targets that moved too fast. Luna's team split, circling the barracks building. Not attacking yet, just visible enough to be seen, just aggressive enough to be terrifying. The doors burst open and men poured out, some in full gear, some half-dressed, all of them shouting. A guard fired. The shot went wild. Another guard fired, hitting Ash in the shoulder, a grazing wound that drew blood but did not slow the wolf. Ash spun and charged the shooter, closing 30 feet in heartbeats. The guard tried to bring his rifle around. Too slow. Ash hit him like a truck, pinning him, snarling inches from his face. The guard went limp, unconscious from terror. 6:09. Shadow's team moved while every eye was on the northern chaos. They approached the western building from the blind side, where Sarah's sabotage had disabled cameras months ago. The service door was locked, but the bolt cutters made short work of it. Shadow went through first, moving low and fast. Sarah followed, pistol in hand. The interior corridor was empty, the guards responding to the northern attack. She ran toward the server room, counting doors. Third on the left. The server room door had a keypad lock. Sarah connected her laptop, ran the exploit. The lock clicked green. The door opened. Rows of server racks hummed in climate-controlled silence. This was the heart of Project Fenrir. Every genetic sequence, every behavioral study, every piece of data needed to recreate the wolves. Sarah placed incendiary devices at the base of each rack, setting 12-minute timers. Enough time to escape, not enough time to stop what was coming. Shadow and his team held the quarter outside. One guard rounded a corner and found himself facing Storm. The guard looked, turned, ran shouting into his radio about monsters. 6:14. David moved with Ghost's team toward the eastern building. They stayed low, using the northern chaos as cover. Two guards stood at the service entrance Sarah had identified. They were looking north toward gunfire and screaming. Ghost did not wait. The Alpha accelerated, River and Ember flanking him. The guards turned at the sound of running paws. Too late. Ghost took the first guard at chest height, driving him into the wall. Ember pinned his legs. River's jaws closed on his wrist. Move and die. David took the second guard with a rifle butt to the temple. A precise strike that dropped the man unconscious. No lethal force unless there was no other choice. Inside, the corridors were narrow and fluorescent lit. David moved point, rifle up, Ghost at his side. The other wolves followed in formation, checking corners, watching their backs. They moved like special forces, like soldiers. The stairs were ahead. David paused, listening. Footsteps above. Two people moving quickly, responding to alarms but unsure where to go. David signaled. 2 fingers up. Ghost ears came forward. Understanding. The wolf launched up the stairs in complete silence. David followed. The second-floor hallway stretched ahead. Doors on both sides. The conference room where Ethan was being held should be at the end, last door on the right. But between David and that door were 2 guards, both armed, both alert. They saw Ghost first. One raised his rifle, the other reached for his radio. David made a choice. He stepped into view, his own rifle aimed at the ceiling. Wait, we do not have to do this. Nobody else has to get hurt. The guards hesitated. One of them, older with gray hair, lowered his rifle slightly. You are Brennan's son. I am, and I just want my boy back. You let me take my son and walk out, nobody else gets hurt. The older guard looked uncertain. The younger one kept his rifle up. Our orders are to contain all hostiles. People are hurt because of what was done to those wolves, David said. Because of experiments that should never have happened. I did not start this, but I am going to end it. You can let me pass, or you can try to stop me. But if you choose to fight, those wolves will defend themselves. Ghost stepped fully into view. The younger guard's hands trembled. The older guard lowered his weapon completely and put a hand on his partner's shoulder. Stand down. Let the man get his boy. The younger guard lowered his rifle. Last door, the older guard said. Two more inside. They might not be reasonable. Thank you. When this is over, get out. Get far from this place. David moved past them, Ghost and the team following. The conference room door was reinforced, a small window showing the interior. David looked through and his heart clenched. Ethan sat in a chair, hands zip-tied, bruises on his face. Alive. Alert. He saw David through the window and his eyes went wide. Two guards inside with him, both with sidearms drawn, positioned where they would have clear shots if anyone came through the door. David looked at Ghost. The wolf looked back. How much are you willing to risk? Everything. Ghost stood on his hind legs, bracing against the wall, and scraped his claws against the window once, twice, 3 times, drawing the guards' attention. Both men turned toward the window. Their weapons came up, pointed at the door. David kicked just below the lock. The reinforced frame held. He kicked again, throwing his weight behind it. This time the wood splintered. One more kick, and the door crashed inward. The guards were already turning, already firing. David went low, rolling right. Ghost went high, launching over David's rolling form. Shots meant for David hit ceiling tiles. Ghost hit the first guard center mass, bearing him to the floor. David came up on one knee and squeezed the trigger once. Not aimed at the second guard's body, aimed at his hand. The shot was perfect. The guard's pistol spun away. He screamed and dropped. Ethan was shouting, but David could not hear over the ringing in his ears. He ran to his son, pulling a knife, cutting the zip ties. Ethan's hands came free, and for a moment they just looked at each other. 3 years of silence. Then Ethan threw his arms around David and held on. I am sorry. God, Dad, I am so sorry for everything. David held his son. Later. We will talk about all of it later. Right now, we need to move. He helped Ethan to his feet. His son limped, favoring his left leg. They did not treat you well. I have had worse in training. He looked at Ghost. Jesus Christ, that is a wolf. 24 wolves, actually. Long story. Come on. They ran for the stairs. Behind them, the facility's alarms reached fever pitch. Somewhere, an automated voice announced evacuation protocols. They made it to the ground floor and burst out the service entrance. The compound was chaos. Smoke rising from the western building where Sarah's incendiaries had ignited. Guards running everywhere. Luna's team had done their job perfectly. Sarah was at the rendezvous point, Shadow's team with her, all unharmed. She saw David and Ethan, and her face lit with relief. The servers are burning. I got all of it. Then get to the trees, everyone out. Now. Ghost howled, a signal the whole pack understood. Time to go. The wolves disengaged, flowing toward the southern fence line where they had cut escape routes during the night. David ran with his son, supporting Ethan's weight. Sarah beside them, wolves all around forming a protective escort. Behind them, the facility was coming apart, smoke and confusion and the sound of men who had lost control. They hit the tree line and kept running. The forest swallowed them, shadows and snow and cold air burning in David's lungs. His knees screamed, his back ached. He was 57 years old and running for his life, and he had never felt more alive. They were half a mile into the forest when the explosion hit. The western building went up in a fireball, Sarah's incendiaries finding something more volatile than planned. The explosion was massive, a rolling wave of orange and black that climbed toward the gray sky. David pulled Ethan down behind a log. Sarah hit the ground beside them. The wolves scattered for cover. The shockwave rolled over them, hot and loud. When the rumbling stopped, David looked back. The western building was gone. The northern barracks was on fire. The eastern administration building was damaged but standing. Men were still running, but there was no organization. Just survival. We have to keep moving, Sarah said. Shaw will send the helicopters. David helped Ethan up. His son was staring at the destruction, trying to process everything. Dad, what the hell is going on? What are these things? William was trying to stop it, David said. He spent his last years sabotaging the project. And these wolves, they are people who deserve freedom. Ghost approached them, Luna at his side. The two alphas looked at David and Ethan, then at the burning facility. Ghost made that complex vocalization again, and somehow David understood. Is it over? Is it finished? Not yet. There is still Shaw, still Dr. Cross, still the people who funded this. But we hurt them today. We set you free. That is what my father wanted. Ethan looked at his father. You are talking to it, and it understands you. He understands more than you know. They all do. And if we survive the next 24 hours, I will tell you everything. They ran deeper into the Montana wilderness, a strange mixed pack of human and wolf, pursued by men with weapons, but protected by the forest and the storm rolling in. Behind them, Project Fenrir burned. But David knew it was not over. Shaw would not give up. Cross would not accept defeat. And somewhere in the ruins were secrets that men would kill to protect or expose. The war had just begun. But for the first time since arriving in Montana, David Brennan had something he had not felt in 3 years. Hope. His son was safe. The wolves were free and the man he had been, the drunk who pushed everyone away, that man was gone, burned away in the same fire that had consumed Project Fenrir. What remained was something harder, something his father had needed him to become, something the wolves recognized when they bowed their heads and accepted him into the pack. A protector, a leader, a man willing to fight for what was right. David looked at Ghost running beside him, at Luna shepherding the younger wolves, at Shadow scouting ahead, at his son limping but alive, at Sarah with evidence finally destroyed. They had won a battle. The war was not over. But today, in this moment, running through the forest with smoke rising behind them, they had proven something important. That mercy was stronger than cruelty. That family meant more than duty. That some cages could be broken. And that 25 wolves with human intelligence were the most dangerous things men like Shaw and Cross would ever face. Because unlike weapons, unlike soldiers, these wolves knew why they were fighting. For freedom, for justice, for revenge against the ones who had hurt them, and for the man who had looked them in the eyes and promised them a better world. The old man's son, William Brennan's legacy, David, their pack brother, their alpha, their hope. The cave system went deeper than David had expected. Ancient limestone passages carved by water over millennia, now dry and cold and perfect for hiding from helicopters and thermal imaging. Sarah led them through the darkness with a flashlight, following a route she had mapped during her months underground. The wolves moved silently behind them, Ghost and Luna at the rear, covering their escape. Ethan limped beside David, one arm over his father's shoulders for support. His CIA training had taught him how to push through pain, but David could see the toll the last 4 days had taken. Bruises darkening on his son's face, blood dried in his hair. The slight tremor in his hands that spoke of stress pushed past limits. They had been running for 3 hours since the facility burned. The helicopters had searched for 90 minutes, rotors beating the air, searchlights probing the snow. But the storm Sarah had predicted was rolling in fast, visibility dropping to near zero. Eventually, the aircraft had turned back. That gave them time, not much, but enough to rest, to plan, to prepare for what came next. The cave Sarah chose for their base was large enough for the whole group, with multiple exits. She had supplies cached here: food, medical supplies, weapons, a radio scanner to monitor Blackwood's security frequencies. David helped Ethan sit against the cave wall and broke out the first aid kit. His son's left knee was swollen, damaged from being forced to kneel during interrogation. David worked in silence, wrapping the joint, administering anti-inflammatories, his hands gentle despite their roughness. "You learned field medicine," Ethan said quietly. "In Iraq, our medic took a round in Fallujah. I had to keep him alive for 6 hours until the dust-off arrived. He made it. Retired stateside. Last I heard, he was teaching high school biology in Ohio." Ethan watched his father's hands work with practiced efficiency. "I did not know that. There is a lot I do not know about you." "That goes both ways." "CIA, when were you going to mention you were a spy?" "I am an analyst, not a field operative. Mostly I sit at a desk and read reports about foreign bioweapons programs. When Blackwood pinged our watch list, they sent me because I had family in the area. Thought I could poke around without drawing attention." He laughed bitterly. "That worked out great. You came here because of Grandpa?" "I came here because I wanted to reconnect with him before it was too late. The CIA assignment was just timing. I did not know he was already dead. Did not know he was involved in what I was investigating." David finished bandaging the knee and sat back. "I am sorry for everything, for not being there when you needed me, for being drunk more often than sober." Ethan's eyes glistened. "I was never ashamed of you. I was angry, frustrated, scared, but never ashamed. You were a good father when you were sober. You just were not sober often enough. I am now, 3 years clean this month. I know. Mom told me. I wanted to call, wanted to say I was proud, but I did not know how to bridge the gap I created. David gripped his son's shoulder. We are bridging it now, in the worst possible circumstances, but we are doing it. Sarah approached with the radio scanner, her expression grim. You need to hear this. She turned up the volume. Colonel Shaw's voice crackled through static. All units respond. The subjects have escaped containment. Dr. Across is implementing Protocol 7. Repeat, Protocol 7 is active. All non-essential personnel evacuate immediately. Military response authorized. What is Protocol 7? David asked. Sarah's face had gone pale. It is the fail-safe. If the wolves ever escaped and could not be recaptured, the protocol called for complete elimination. Not just the wolves, everyone who knew about the project. Shaw is going to kill his own people to maintain secrecy. Ethan struggled to his feet despite the damaged knee. We have to warn them, those guards are just contractors. Sarah shook her head. It is too late. Shaw will have already segregated personnel. The ones who know too much are already marked. And Dr. Cross has been pushing for this for months. She wanted to field test the combat applications. David felt cold understanding wash over him. They are coming for us, not to capture, to kill, and they are going to use Victoria to do it. Sarah nodded. Cross has been testing the serum on herself for 6 months. Started with small doses, muscle enhancement, sensory improvement. By 3 months ago, she was injecting concentrated versions. Your father's notes documented her transformation. He called her the prototype for the next phase. Show me. Sarah pulled up files on her laptop, photographs William had taken secretly. The progression was visible and horrifying. Dr. Victoria Cross in early images, an attractive woman in her 40s with sharp features and intelligent eyes. Then images showing subtle changes. More muscle definition, eyes that reflected light strangely, fingernails that had hardened into something like claws. The final photograph, dated 1 week before William died, showed Victoria barely recognizable. Taller, more powerful. Her face had changed shape, jaw stronger, teeth visible through lips pulled back in something between smile and snarl. Her eyes were yellow now, fully lupine, burning with intelligence and madness combined. She is not human anymore, Sarah whispered. She is not wolf either. She is something new, something we never intended to create. And she is stronger, faster, and smarter than any of us. Can she be killed? Ethan asked, the analyst looking for tactical data. I do not know. The serum enhances healing. She survived injuries that should have been fatal during testing. Small caliber rounds do not stop her. Your father theorized that catastrophic damage to the brain or heart might work. But getting close enough means getting past enhanced reflexes and predator instincts. Ghost moved forward from where he had been resting with Luna. The alpha wolf approached the laptop and looked at Victoria's image on the screen. He growled, a sound of pure hatred that raised the hair on David's arms. Ghost recognized her, remembered her, and whatever she had done to him left scars deeper than flesh. David looked at the wolf, at his son, at Sarah, at the 24 predators who had trusted him enough to follow him into battle. They had won one fight, destroyed the facility, freed themselves. But the war was not over. How long until they find us? David asked. Sarah checked her surveillance feeds. Hours, maybe. The storm will slow them, but Shaw has tracking equipment, heat sensors. And if Cross is leading the hunt, she can track by scent better than any bloodhound. Then we do not wait for them to find us. We go to them. Everyone turned to stare. Ethan spoke first. Dad, that is suicide. You said it yourself. Impossible odds. We got lucky at the facility because we had surprise. David stood and walked to the cave entrance. Snow was falling heavily. The storm fully arrived. Visibility down to 20 feet. Perfect conditions for an ambush. Perfect conditions for wolves who could see and smell what humans could not. He turned back. Sarah, where would Shaw go? If he is evacuating personnel but needs to maintain operational capability, where is his fallback? Sarah thought. There is a command bunker, 2 miles east of the main facility, built into the mountain. Originally Cold War era, decommissioned in the 90s, but Blackwood renovated it. Communications equipment, armory, supplies for extended operations. How many can it hold? 20 people comfortably, 30 in emergency, but the entrance is a kill box, single access tunnel, cameras, remotely operated weapons. We are not going to assault it. We are going to make them come out. Ghost made a questioning sound. David knelt and began drawing in the dirt. The bunker, the tunnel, the surrounding forest. He drew marks for wolves positioned in a circle. We do not attack, we siege. We surround the bunker and wait. Shaw has supplies, but not infinite supplies. We make them feel hunted. Make them understand that every time they step outside, there are wolves waiting. Ethan shook his head. That could take days. Eventually, Shaw will call in actual military support. Then we make them desperate enough to make mistakes before help arrives. Sarah, can you hack their communications from here? If I can get within range of their network, maybe. I am thinking we convince Shaw that Cross has gone rogue, that the serum has made her unstable. Turn them against each other. Sarah smiled slowly. Divide and conquer. Shaw is military. He follows rules. If he believes Cross is compromised, his training will tell him to neutralize her. It is risky, Ethan said. A lot of things that can go wrong. Every plan has risk, but doing nothing guarantees they hunt us down eventually. Better to control the engagement. He looked at Ghost. The wolf held his gaze, evaluating. Then Ghost turned to Luna and made a series of vocalizations. Luna responded. Shadow joined in. The pack was communicating, debating. It took 3 minutes. Then Ghost turned back to David and dipped his head. Agreement, trust. They spent the next hour preparing. David and Ethan checked weapons and ammunition. Sarah worked on hacking tools. The wolves rested, conserving energy. Outside, the storm intensified. David found a moment alone with his son while Sarah was distracted. If something happens to me tonight, you get Sarah and the wolves out. There is a federal agent, Lisa Chen. Your agency will know her. Sarah has evidence. You make sure the truth gets out. Ethan looked up. Nothing is going to happen to you. You do not know that. Neither do you. We could both walk out of this. David sat beside his son. When you were 8, you asked me why I drank. Do you remember? I remember. I told you it helped me forget bad dreams. That was not the whole truth. I drank because I was angry. At Grandpa for leaving. At myself for joining the army to chase his approval. At the things I did in Iraq. I drank because it was easier than dealing with becoming the same kind of man my father was. Dad, you do not have to do this. Yes, I do. Because if we do not make it through tonight, I need you to know that you were never the problem. You were the best thing I ever did. And cutting you out of my life was the wake-up call I needed. You forcing me to choose saved my life. Ethan's voice was thick. I was so angry. But watching you today, seeing you lead those wolves, I understand now what Grandpa must have felt. I am just trying to do the right thing. That is what makes you strong. They sat in silence. Then Sarah called that it was time. The storm had reached its peak. Perfect conditions for what came next. The pack assembled at the cave entrance. 24 wolves and 3 humans, preparing to face an enemy that had every advantage except one. The wolves knew this forest, and they had something Shaw and Cross did not. A reason to fight that went beyond orders or money. David checked his rifle one last time. Ethan stood beside him, limping but steady. Sarah had her laptop and tranquilizer gun. Ghost and Luna moved to the front, ready to lead. The bunker is 2 miles east, Sarah said. We follow the ridgeline, stay below sight lines for their sensors. We set up around the perimeter and wait for full dark. Then I start the hack, and we begin psychological operations. David looked at the storm. Somewhere out there, Shaw was preparing defenses. Somewhere out there, Victoria Cross was becoming more monster than human. But David had his son back, had allies he never expected, had a purpose beyond just surviving one more day. He looked at Ghost, and the alpha wolf looked back, yellow eyes steady and unafraid. Let us finish this. They moved into the storm like shadows. The snow covered their tracks. The wind carried away their scent. And in the darkness, 24 pairs of eyes glowed, watching, waiting. 2 miles away, Colonel Shaw stood in the command bunker watching security monitors, unaware that his war was already lost. Not because his defenses were weak, not because his training had failed, but because he had underestimated the bonds between father and son, between soldiers who had fought together, between wounded creatures who remembered every injury. The storm raged, the night deepened, and in the forest the wolves prepared for war. They reached the ridge, overlooking the bunker as full darkness fell. Below them, barely visible through the storm, was the entrance, a concrete structure built into the mountainside. Lights burned in the windows. Guards moved on patrol despite the weather. Shaw was ready for a siege. What he was not ready for was what David had learned in Iraq. You do not beat a fortified position by attacking it. You beat it by making the people inside so terrified of what waits outside that they make mistakes. Sarah set up her equipment, connecting to the bunker's network through vulnerabilities she had planted months ago. I am in. What do you want them to hear? David thought, then told her. Sarah smiled, cold and vengeful, and began to work. Inside the bunker, Colonel Shaw's radio crackled with a transmission that seemed to come from one of his own guards. Sir, we have a situation in the medical bay. It is Dr. Cross. She is changing, becoming aggressive. The serum, sir. I think it is affecting her mind. Shaw grabbed the radio. Specify, what do you mean changing? She killed Johnson, sir. Just ripped his throat out. Said something about completing the transformation. Said the weak have to be culled. Sir, she is hunting in the corridors. Sarah had not sent that message. David had. Speaking into Sarah's microphone, disguising his voice with static, planting the seed of doubt. The bunker erupted into confusion, alarms, shouting, weapons being charged. Ghost looked at David and made a sound that might have been approval. Phase 2, everyone in position. The wolves spread out in a wide circle around the bunker, staying hidden, waiting for Shaw to make his first mistake. They did not have to wait long. The bunker door opened and 6 guards emerged, heavily armed, moving in formation. They were looking for Victoria. They did not see the wolves positioned in the trees above them. Shadow dropped down behind the rear guard, silent as falling snow. The man went down without a sound. Shadow dragged him into the darkness. The remaining 5 guards realized too late they were under attack. They opened fire wildly, muzzle flashes bright in the storm, but hitting nothing. The wolves were already gone. 2 more guards fell to Luna's team, taken from the flanks. The 3 surviving guards retreated to the bunker, dragging their wounded, their radio calls frantic. Shaw's voice crackled through the static, demanding reports, trying to maintain control of an engagement slipping away. Then Victoria's voice cut through the communications, cold and predatory and no longer entirely human. They are mine, Shaw, the wolves and the intruders both. I will bring you their heads and prove that the serum works, that I am the success your project needs, that I am the future of warfare. Shaw tried to respond, but Victoria had already gone silent. Somewhere in the bunker, the prototype was preparing to hunt. Sarah looked at David, fear in her eyes. She is actually coming out. She really is. The serum has taken over. Can the wolves stop her? I do not know. Your father said she was stronger than any of them, faster, and she has human intelligence guiding predator instincts. Then we make sure she does not reach the wolves. We end this between her and us. The bunker door opened again, and Victoria Cross emerged into the storm. She had shed her lab coat and stood in tactical gear that could not hide what she had become. Taller than before, spine elongated, proportions wrong. Her hands ended in claws that gleamed like polished bone. Her face was a nightmare fusion, human features stretched over a skull that had changed shape. But it was her eyes that David would remember. Yellow and bright and burning with intelligence and madness. She sniffed the air, scenting blood and fear and prey. Then she looked directly at David's position, seeing in the darkness what human eyes should not perceive. William's son, she called out, her voice carrying despite the wind. Your father was weak, could not appreciate what we created. But I appreciate it. I am the perfection he never had the courage to become. She moved, faster than anything that size should move, crossing 50 feet in seconds. David barely had time to bring his rifle up. His first shot missed. His second caught her in the shoulder. Victoria did not even slow down. Ghost hit her from the side. 600 pounds of enhanced predator meeting the prototype. They went down together in a tangle of fur and claws, both snarling. But Victoria was stronger. She got her legs under Ghost and kicked, launching the wolf through the air. Ghost hit a tree and dropped, stunned but alive. Luna charged from behind, leading 5 wolves. They hit Victoria from multiple angles, packed tactics designed to bring down prey larger than any individual. But Victoria was not prey. She was predator. She fought like one, movements economical and brutal. She broke River's leg with one strike, sent Ash tumbling, grabbed Storm by the throat and threw him 20 feet. The wolves scattered, regrouping, but David could see the truth. They were outmatched. He stepped out of cover, rifle aimed at Victoria's head. Stop. Fight me instead. That is what you want. To prove you are better than the man who created you, better than William Brennan, better than his son, prove it. Victoria turned her yellow eyes toward him. Then she smiled, dropped into a crouch, and charged. David fired 3 times. All 3 shots hit center mass. Victoria barely stumbled. She closed the distance and backhanded the rifle from his hands. Then she grabbed him by the throat and lifted him off the ground. So weak, so fragile. This is what humanity looks like without enhancement. David's vision was going dark. He fumbled at his belt, fingers closing on the combat knife he had carried since Iraq, and drove it upward with everything he had left. The blade sank into Victoria's side, below the ribs, angled toward vital organs. She screamed, more surprise than pain, and dropped David. He fell gasping. The wound was bleeding but already beginning to close. She looked at David with something like respect. Good, you actually hurt me. Then Ethan was there, firing his pistol, round after round into Victoria's back. She spun toward him, snarling, and David knew his son was about to die. Ghost appeared again, bloodied and limping but still fighting. His jaws closed on Victoria's shoulder, enhanced teeth finding purchase, holding on with determination. Luna joined him, teeth sinking into Victoria's leg. Then Shadow. Then more wolves, the entire pack surging forward, understanding that together they could do what none could do alone. Victoria fought. God, she fought. Her claws opened wounds, her strength threw bodies aside, but there were too many. They were fighting for revenge. For every injection, every surgery, every moment of captivity and pain. They were fighting for freedom. David struggled to his feet, retrieved his rifle, and put it to Victoria's head. She looked up at him, the wolves still holding her down, and for just a moment the madness cleared from her eyes. I just wanted to prove it worked, she whispered. I just wanted to be more than human. You proved it. You proved that some lines should never be crossed. He pulled the trigger. The wolves released her and stepped back. Victoria Cross lay still in the snow. Ghost limped to David's forehead. Una gathered her pack. 3 wolves down but not dead. River's leg broken. Storm's shoulder dislocated. Ash with deep claw wounds. But they had survived. Shaw's voice crackled over the radio Sarah had been monitoring. All units stand down. Dr. Cross is deceased. Brennan, if you can hear this, I am willing to negotiate. David picked up Sarah's radio transmitter. You created monsters, Shaw. You tortured innocent creatures. You killed my father when he tried to stop you. You do not get to negotiate, you get to surrender. Silence. Then Shaw's voice, harder now. Or what? Or by tomorrow morning, this place will be swarming with federal agents. Your only choice now is whether you face them as a prisoner or as a fugitive. Another silence, longer. Then the bunker door opened. Shaw emerged, hands raised, his remaining personnel behind him. 15 men, unarmed, surrendering to wolves and weather, and the knowledge that their war was over. David kept his rifle trained on Shaw as the colonel approached. Shaw's eyes were not on the weapon. He was looking at the wolves, at the pack assembled behind David, watching him with yellow eyes full of intelligence and judgment. Your father said they were special, Shaw said quietly. Said they deserved freedom. I thought he had gone soft, but looking at them now, seeing what they did to Cross, I think maybe he was right. You do not get absolution, Shaw. You do not get to feel good because you realize too late what you did was wrong. I know. I will spend whatever time I have left in a federal prison thinking about that. But for what it is worth, your father was a better man than I gave him credit for, and you are a better man than he thought he could raise. David did not respond. Sarah called out that she had reached Agent Chen, that FBI helicopters were already in the air, that by morning Project Fenrir would be headline news. Ethan put his hand on his father's shoulder and David finally lowered his rifle. It was over. The war, the hunt, the long shadow his father had cast over both their lives. The wolves gathered closer, forming a protective circle. Ghost pressed his head against David's hand, and David felt the weight of responsibility settle on him one final time. Not the burden of his father's sins, that had been lifted, but something else. The responsibility of guardianship, of protection, of making sure these 24 creatures who should never have existed were given the chance to live free and safe. The storm began to fade. Dawn was still hours away. But for the first time since arriving in Montana, David Brennan could see light on the horizon. They had survived. Father and son, human and wolf, and the inheritance William Brennan had left was finally, truly David's to manage. Not land, not guilt, but hope, and the chance to build something better on the ashes of what had been destroyed. 3 months after the wolves of Blackwood Mountain became national news, David Brennan sat in a hearing room in Washington, D.C., and watched powerful men try to explain away the inexplicable. Senator Robert Hastings, silver-haired and confident despite the federal charges hanging over him, spoke into the microphone with the practiced ease of someone who had spent 30 years in politics. Project Fenrir was a legitimate national security initiative, Hastings said, his voice carrying authority. Was it perfect? No. Were mistakes made? Certainly, but the intent was always to protect American interests, to develop capabilities that would keep our soldiers safe. The tragedy is that a few individuals, Dr. Cross specifically, allowed ambition to override ethics. David sat in the gallery between Ethan and Sarah, listening to the lies, feeling his blood pressure rise. Around them sat reporters, federal attorneys, members of oversight committees. Behind the scenes, the CIA and FBI were still sorting through the wreckage of what had been a black book program with tentacles reaching into defense contractors, pharmaceutical companies, and the highest levels of government. It had taken 8 weeks just to secure the wolves, to create a temporary facility where they could be held while their fate was debated. The public wanted them destroyed. Scientists wanted to study them. Politicians wanted them to disappear quietly. Nobody asked the wolves what they wanted. David had spent those 8 weeks fighting the bureaucracy, fighting the fear, fighting people who looked at Ghost and Luna and saw only threats. He had given testimony to 6 different committees, had been interviewed by every major news network, had become the face of a controversy he never asked for but could not walk away from, because he had made a promise to his father, to the wolves, to himself. The senator was still speaking, explaining how oversight had been in place, how unfortunate it was that William Brennan had chosen to sabotage legitimate research. David felt Ethan tense beside him. Sarah leaned over and whispered, "Agent Chen says the vote will be this afternoon. It could go either way." David nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The vote would determine whether the wolves lived or died, whether they would be euthanized humanely or whether they would be given the sanctuary David had fought for. The Brennan Hayes Wildlife Preserve, 2,400 acres of Montana wilderness protected in perpetuity. It was not freedom, not really. The wolves would be tracked, observed, restricted. They would never be allowed to breed, their genetic line ending with this generation. But it was better than death. The hearing broke for lunch. David, Ethan, and Sarah made their way through the crowd of reporters. David had learned to tune them out, to walk past cameras without reacting. They found a quiet conference room where Agent Lisa Chen was waiting with updates. The FBI agent looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes from months of working the case. "Shaw took a plea deal," Chen said without preamble. 20 years in federal prison in exchange for testimony against the financial backers. He gave us everything: bank records, communications, the names of every congressman and general who knew. "Will it be enough?" Ethan asked. His CIA credentials had been revoked during the investigation, his cover blown. He was on administrative leave while the agency decided his future. "Enough to destroy Hastings," Chen said. "Maybe enough to trigger reforms, but Washington has a short memory." "But the wolves will not be," David said. "Whatever happens politically, they stay visible. They stay protected." Chen looked at him with respect. "You sound like your father." David had read those letters, found in his father's effects. Letters William had written but never sent, addressed to David, trying to explain, trying to apologize, trying to make his son understand that some mistakes take a lifetime to fix. The afternoon session began with testimony from Sarah. She walked the committee through the science, through the ethical violations, through her own complicity and eventual rebellion. Her voice never wavered as she described procedures that made senators flinch. Then they called David. He walked to the witness table and sat under the lights, knowing this testimony would define how history remembered Project Fenrir. The committee chairman, a stern woman from Vermont, began. "Mr. Brennan, you have stated that these wolves deserve to live. Can you explain why you believe creatures created through illegal experiments should be allowed to continue existing?" David looked at the committee. He thought about Ghost creating symbols in snow, about Luna defending her pack, about Shadow scouting ahead, about the way the wolves had fought beside him. "Because they are people," he said simply. "Not human people, but people nonetheless. They think, they feel, they remember, they form relationships and make decisions and understand concepts like justice and loyalty and sacrifice. My father helped create them, and that was wrong. But they exist now. They are alive and aware, and they have done nothing to deserve death except have the misfortune of being born from an experiment they did not ask for. Senator Hastings leaned forward. With respect, Mr. Brennan, they are weapons. They have killed. They are dangerous. They defended themselves and others, David corrected. Every injury they inflicted was in response to aggression or in protection of innocent lives. The only person they killed was Dr. Cross, who was trying to murder all of us. That is not the behavior of mindless weapons. That is the behavior of thinking beings making moral choices. But can they be controlled? Another senator asked. If we allow them to live, how do we ensure public safety? The same way we ensure it with any intelligent being. Through law, through consequences, through understanding that freedom comes with responsibility. These wolves have proven they can cooperate, can follow agreements, can exercise restraint. They could have killed dozens during our assault on the Blackwood facility. They chose not to. They disabled and disarmed, but did not slaughter. That shows more moral reasoning than many humans demonstrate. The questioning continued for 2 hours. David answered every question, deflected every attempt to paint the wolves as monsters, pushed back against every argument for their destruction. The chairman called for the vote. 7 senators would decide. 4 votes needed. Anything less, and the wolves would be euthanized within 30 days. The votes came one by one. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. 3-3. The final vote belonged to Senator Mitchell from Idaho, a man who had been silent through most of the hearing. He looked at David, then at the packet in front of him. I grew up on a ranch, he said. Spent my whole life around animals. Worked with bays, horses, cattle. I know the difference between a trained animal and a thinking being. And I have watched the videos, seen the wolves communicate, seen them make decisions, seen them show emotion and reasoning. My rancher daddy would have called me soft for this, but I cannot in good conscience vote to kill creatures that show every sign of being aware of their own existence. He paused. I vote yes. The preserve is approved. David felt Ethan grip his shoulder, felt Sarah's hand find his, felt something tight in his chest finally loosen. It was not everything he had hoped for. The restrictions were still severe. But it was life. It was a chance. It was a promise kept. But David was not finished. Not yet. Before the hearing adjourned, David stood and asked to make one final statement. The chairman, surprised, allowed it. There is one more person who needs to answer for what happened on that mountain, David said, his voice carrying through the chamber. Senator Hastings has spent this hearing trying to distance himself from the atrocities committed in Project Fenrir's name. But the financial records Agent Chen provided show that he was not just aware of the experiments. He was their primary architect and financier. Hastings' face went red. This is outrageous. I will not sit here and be slandered by some plumber who thinks he understands classified national security matters. I am not a plumber anymore, Senator. I am the guardian of 24 beings you tried to create as weapons. And I have spent the last 3 months learning exactly who profited from their suffering. David pulled out a folder, evidence Sarah and Chen had compiled. Bank transfers, email communications, meeting minutes, all showing Hastings' direct involvement not just in funding, but in directing the most brutal aspects of the research. You were not protecting national security, David said. You were building a campaign platform. You planned to run for president on the promise of revolutionary biodefense capabilities. You were going to use those wolves as a demonstration, a proof of concept to terrify voters into supporting your candidacy. My father discovered this. That is why you had him killed. The chamber erupted. Hastings was shouting denials. The chairman was banging her gavel. Security was moving toward Hastings as federal marshals entered through the rear doors. Senator Robert Hastings, Agent Chen said, stepping forward with her credentials displayed, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, and violations of the Biological Weapons Convention. You have the right to remain silent. Hastings tried to push past the marshals, tried to maintain his dignity, failed. As they led him out in handcuffs, he caught David's eye. The senator's expression was pure hatred. You have destroyed me, Hastings hissed. No, Senator. You destroyed yourself. I just made sure everyone knew about it. The hearing room was still in chaos as David, Ethan, and Sarah made their way out. Reporters were shouting questions. Cameras were flashing. But David walked through it all with his head high and his son's hand on his shoulder. Outside, Agent Chen caught up with them. That was risky. You could have waited until trial to present that evidence. David shook his head. The wolves could not wait, and Hastings needed to know that his victims had won, that the weapons he tried to create had turned against him. Chen smiled. Your father would be proud. 2 weeks later, David stood at the edge of the newly established Brennan Hayes Wildlife Preserve and watched as the transport vehicles arrived. Federal agents and wildlife specialists had spent 14 days preparing the site, installing tracking systems and observation posts while trying to minimize human presence. The first transport opened and Ghost emerged, muzzled and sedated, but still aware enough to look around. His eyes found David in the crowd. The alpha wolf made a sound, muffled by the muzzle, that might have been recognition or greeting or goodbye. Luna came next, then Shadow, then the others. All 21 surviving wolves, injured and healing, but alive. River still limped from her broken leg. Storm's shoulder had healed but left him with limited range of motion. But they were here. They had survived. The last transport held the youngest wolves, including the one David had named Hope, a female born after the initial experiments, smaller than the others, with fur the color of snow and eyes that held less rage and more curiosity. She had never known freedom before this moment. David watched as the handlers moved the wolves into the release area. Sarah stood beside him. Ethan had returned to Virginia, his CIA career salvaged, but he had promised to visit. The senator was right, Sarah said quietly. Your father would be proud. You finished what he started. David shook his head. I gave them survival. Dad gave them the capacity to want more than that, to dream of freedom even when it seemed impossible. What will you do now? You could go back to Seattle, resume your life. David looked at the mountain, at the forest, at the land his father had left him. I think I will stay. Someone needs to be here to watch over them, to make sure the government keeps its promises. Sarah smiled. I was hoping you would say that, because I applied to be the preserve's senior biologist. The handlers began removing the muzzles and opening the transport crates. Ghost was first. He stood at the edge of the forest, looking back one final time at the humans who had given him this chance. Then he lifted his head and howled, a sound of triumph and sorrow and hope all mixed together. The other wolves answered, their voices rising to fill the valley, echoing off the mountains. One by one they moved into the trees, disappearing into shadows and freedom. Hope was the last to go. The young wolf approached David slowly, cautiously. David knelt in the snow and held out his hand, not touching, just offering. The wolf sniffed his fingers, learning his scent, filing it away in that enhanced memory. Then Hope turned and ran after her pack, her legs churning through the snow, learning for the first time what it felt like to move without walls, to run without knowing where the cage ended, to be free. David stood watching until the last wolf disappeared. Then he walked back to his truck, where his father's journal sat on the passenger seat. The final pages still unread, still too painful. But now, with the wolves safe and his promise kept, he thought he could finally see what his father had written in those last days. He opened the journals to the final entry, dated the morning William died. Today they come for me. Shaw called an hour ago with an ultimatum. Stop interfering or face consequences. I told him I would see him in hell first. I am an old man with a bad heart and a son who will not take my calls. I have nothing left to lose except the satisfaction of knowing I tried to fix my greatest mistake. But I am leaving something behind. Not for Shaw or Cross or the government. For David, my boy. The son I abandoned because I thought duty mattered more than family. I know he hates me. He has earned that right. But I also know he is stronger than I ever was. More principled, more capable of doing what needs to be done. The wolves need a guardian, someone who will fight for them even when it is hard. I failed them for too long, but David will not fail. He has his mother's compassion and my stubbornness and something I never had, the courage to choose love over duty. If you are reading this, son, then I am gone and the inheritance is yours. Not just the land, not just the wolves, but the chance to be the father I never was. To Ethan, to the creatures I helped create, to the future that rises from the ashes of my mistakes. I am sorry I left you. Sorry I chose wrong so many times. Sorry I could not be the man you needed, but I am not sorry I am leaving you this. Because I know, deep in my old broken heart, that you will do what is right. You will protect what I created. You will be what I could not be. Strong enough to care, brave enough to stay, good enough to forgive. I hope you can forgive me, David. Someday, when the anger fades, I hope you understand that I left because I was weak, but I came back to this mountain because I finally learned what strength really means. Not the strength to walk away, the strength to return, to face what you have done, to try, even when it is too late, to make amends. The wolves know this. They understand failure and redemption better than most humans. They have forgiven me for what I did to them. Perhaps, in time, you can do the same. Be well, my son. Be better than me. And know that every day I spent on this mountain, I was thinking of you and wishing I had made different choices. The entry ended there. David sat in his truck with tears on his face, reading and rereading those words, feeling something shift inside him. The anger he had carried for 45 years did not disappear, but it softened, changed shape, became something closer to understanding. His father had been wrong about many things, had made terrible choices, had created suffering. But at the end, William Brennan had tried to make it right, had spent his final years fighting the monster he helped create, had left his son not a burden, but a purpose. And David had fulfilled it. He started the truck and drove back to the cabin that was now his home. The solar panels William had installed still worked. The generator still ran. The walls still held photographs of wolves. David had not removed them. They were part of the history. That night, he sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and watched the moon rise over the preserve. Somewhere in those trees, Ghost was leading his pack. Luna was teaching the younger wolves. Shadow was scouting. Hope was learning what it meant to be wild. His phone buzzed with a message from Ethan. How did the release go? David typed back. They are home. Finally, how are you doing? Better. The agency cleared me. New assignment starting next month. He paused, then added, I am thinking of coming out for Thanksgiving, if that is okay. David smiled. It is more than okay. It is perfect. Good. Because there is someone I want you to meet. Her name is Claire. We have been dating for 6 months. I think it is serious. I look forward to meeting her. Dad? Yeah? Thank you. For coming when I needed you. For not giving up on me even when I gave up on you. For being the father I needed when it mattered most. David wiped his eyes. Thank you for giving me the chance to be that father. I love you, son. I love you too, Dad. The conversation ended. David sat in the quiet, listening to the night sounds. An owl calling, wind through the pines, and in the distance, so faint he might have imagined it, the howl of a wolf who had learned what freedom tasted like. 6 months passed, winter gave way to spring. The preserve became established, the wolves settling into patterns that were part wild instinct and part learned behavior. Scientists came to observe, always from a distance, always respectful. Sarah took the position as senior biologist and moved into a cabin half a mile from David's. They fell into an easy partnership, monitoring the pack, ensuring they had what they needed. It was not friendship exactly, not romance, but companionship. Two people bound by shared experience and common purpose. Ethan visited 3 times, bringing Claire on the second visit. She was a teacher from Virginia, warm and funny, who won David over when she asked intelligent questions about the wolves. On the 3rd visit, Ethan asked if David would be his best man at the wedding planned for autumn. David said yes and cried and felt the last pieces of his broken family beginning to heal. One morning in late spring, David hiked to the northern boundary of the preserve where the observation post gave a view of the entire valley. He brought his father's journal and a shovel. He dug a hole beneath a massive pine that had probably stood here for 300 years. Into the hole he placed the journal, wrapped in waterproof plastic along with a letter he had written. Dad, the wolves are safe. Ethan is getting married. I am sober and have been for 3 years and change. I think I finally understand what you were trying to do, what you needed me to be. I forgive you. Not because what you did was okay, it was not, but because I understand now that we are all just trying to fix our mistakes before we run out of time. You ran out of time, I did not, and that makes all the difference. Thank you for the inheritance, not the land or the money. Thank you for trusting me with the wolves, with your legacy, with the chance to be better than you were, better than I was. I will watch over them. I will make sure they stay free. I will do what you asked because it is right and because it is what I need to do to be the man you hoped I would become. Rest easy. Your work is done. Mine is just beginning. Your son, David. He buried the letter in the journal and marked the spot with a cairn of stones. It was not a grave. William was buried in Arlington, but it was a memorial, a place where father and son could finally meet in purpose. David stood and brushed the dirt from his hands, turned to head back down the trail, and stopped. Ghost stood 20 feet away, watching him with those amber eyes that had seen too much and remembered everything. The alpha wolf had not approached a human since the release 6 months ago, had kept his distance, leading his pack away from observation posts. But now he was here. They looked at each other across 20 feet of mountain meadow, man and wolf, guardian and protected. Ghost took 3 steps forward. David held his breath, not moving. The wolf came closer, closer, until he was standing within arm's reach. The wolf lowered his head and pressed it against David's hand, just for a moment, just long enough to communicate what words could not. Recognition, respect, trust. Then Ghost pulled away, turned, and loped back into the forest, back to his pack, back to the wild, but not back to captivity, never again to captivity. David stood alone in the meadow with his father's memorial behind him and the wolves' future ahead, and felt the weight of inheritance finally lift. Not gone completely, it would never be gone, but transformed into something bearable, into something that felt less like burden and more like purpose. He walked back to his cabin as afternoon sun filtered through the trees. Sarah was at the observation post. Ethan would call tonight. The wolves were in the valley doing whatever wolves with human intelligence and wild hearts did. And David Brennan, 57 years old, 3 years sober, son of the man who created monsters and tried to make them free, felt something he had not felt in decades. Peace, not the peace of a life without complications, but the peace of knowing he had done what was right even when it was hard, of knowing he had kept his promises, of knowing that when his own time came and his own son inherited whatever legacy David left behind, Ethan would find not shame but a story of redemption, of mistakes made and owned, of debts paid, of creatures saved and families healed and futures built on the ashes of what had been burned away. 2 years later, David stood in a church in Virginia and watched his son marry the woman he loved. Ethan smiled the way young men smile on their wedding day, full of hope and certainty. At the reception, Ethan pulled him aside. "Claire is pregnant. We just found out. We want to name him William, if that is okay with you." David felt tears come again, easier now than they used to be. "That is wonderful. That is perfect." They stood together, father and son, with a wedding celebration around them and a future stretching ahead. That night, back at his hotel, David called Sarah to share the news. She was at the preserve, monitoring a wolf birth. Luna had given birth 3 days ago, breaking the federal rule about breeding. 5 of them, Sarah said, healthy, growing fast. Luna was not supposed to be able to breed, but life finds a way. What will they do? Will they take the pups? They are trying to decide. Some want to study them, some want to terminate them, but I do not think they understand what they are dealing with. Luna is not going to let anyone near those pups. David smiled at the thought of the alpha defending her family with the same determination David had defended Ethan. Good for her. Keep me informed. I will. How is the wedding? Perfect. And I am going to be a grandfather. Congratulations. William would have loved that. Yeah, he would have. They talked for a few more minutes, then said goodbye. David sat in his hotel room looking at pictures on his phone. Ethan and Claire cutting the cake, and mixed in with the wedding photos. Pictures from the preserve. Ghost on a ridge. Luna with her pack. Hope teaching younger wolves. 2 legacies running parallel. One human, one wolf. Both started in mistakes and reaching towards something better. The morning David returned to Montana, he found Agent Chen waiting at the preserve entrance with news. The federal government had made a decision about the wolf pups. They would be allowed to live, to remain with their pack, to grow up wild and free. It was a victory hard won, Chen explained, fought over in closed-door meetings and finally decided by people who understood that some things, once started, could not be easily stopped. David thanked her and drove up the mountain to his cabin. Sarah was already there with news that Luna had brought the pups out of the den for the first time. They hiked to the observation post and watched through binoculars as 5 tiny wolves played in a clearing, tumbling over each other, learning to use legs that would grow strong, learning to howl with voices that would one day echo like their father's. Ghost and Luna watched from nearby, protective and proud. And when Ghost looked toward the observation post, the alpha wolf dipped his head in acknowledgement, saying thank you, saying we did it, saying this is what freedom looks like. David lowered the binoculars and looked at Sarah. They made it. Against everything, they made it. We made it, Sarah corrected. All of us, together. And in that moment, watching wolves that should never have existed play in sunlight they had been denied for too long, David Brennan understood what his father had been trying to tell him in that final journal entry. Legacy is not what we leave behind. It is what we make possible for those who come after. It is not the mistakes that define us, but what we do to fix them. It is not the inheritance we receive, but how we transform it into something worth passing on. William had left David broken things, traumatized wolves, a poisoned legacy, guilt and shame. But David had transformed those broken things into something beautiful, into freedom and family and hope, into a preserve where wolves could be wild, into a relationship with his son that was finally whole, where redemption was possible even when it seemed too late, where love finally and completely triumphed over duty. The sun climbed higher, the wolf pups played, and David sat with Sarah in the quiet peace of a mountain morning watching life continue despite everything that had tried to stop it. Watching legacy become something more than inheritance, watching it become hope.